You're listening to Inside Eyes, and I'm your host, Laura Northrup. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Inside Eyes. I'm your host, Laura Northrup, and this series is about the use of entheogens and psychedelics to heal from sexual trauma. In today's episode, I interview Melissa. Melissa shares about her experience in using MDMA on her healing path, and she's also going to talk a little bit about using LSD. So most of these interviews are about people healing from incidences of physical sexual violence. But many forms of sexual trauma or wounding around sexuality aren't as clear-cut and easy to label. And what I love about this interview is how Melissa explores that space where there isn't one particular incident or a series of assaults, but a more subtle, pervasive wound around love, self-worth, and sexuality. We have so many issues and so much shame and confusion around sexuality and love and the larger cultural landscape that we're all existing in. And for that reason, I imagine a lot of people can relate to some of what she talks about in this interview. But before we get into the conversation, a word of caution. None of the episodes in this series are suitable for children, and the topics are emotionally evocative, so please take care of yourself as the listener. Okay, so to start, you're about to hear Melissa talk about what led her to trying MDMA and some of the results she experienced from it.
I got interested in the use of, or the therapeutic use of psychedelics about 2 years ago, maybe a little less actually. And it was my boyfriend, I think, showed me an article, or we watched like a talk about like the use of psychedelics in psychiatry, like in connection to healing trauma and so on. At that point, I had been on what I sort of like to refer to as my healing journey for maybe about a year. And I was very, very open to trying new things as long as it felt safe. And so me and my boyfriend at the time, we did a bit of research on this. And he told me this story that kind of really got me interested in possibly trying psychedelics. And that was that earlier in his life, he struggled with drug addiction, mostly heroin. And he told me this story that, he and his friends, they would take, everything, all kinds of drugs. But if somebody came to a party where they were at with psychedelics, or in particular LSD, he said that they would shy away from that, and that they would actually get scared or nervous around psychedelics. And this kind of fascinated me. And, so I asked him, well, why was that? And he said that, well, sometimes when you do psychedelics, you sort of meet yourself, or you see yourself, maybe not objectively, but you have that kind of out-of-body experience where you can observe yourself from another level of reality. And often you are also, you are met with your wounds and maybe patterns of behavior that are not working out in your life. In that way, psychedelics forces you to look at yourself and maybe change some of the things that you're doing. And for an addict, that is quite a terrifying thing.
Mm-hmm. So that got you interested.
Yes, that story really got me interested because I know, having struggled with addiction myself, that as an addict you're usually very open to trying anything that feels like an escape. And I always viewed or thought of psychedelics as an escape drug. And so I had a lot of fears around it. But when I heard this story, I thought, well, if a heroin addict won't take it, then it's got to be a different kind of escape.
At another point in our conversation, Melissa tells me she has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is a part of what interested her in trying out MDMA, because she had read how MDMA was being used in the treatment of trauma. We talk more about how PTSD has impacted her and how she approached her work with MDMA.
I do have a very hard time regulating emotion because of it. And this was maybe one of the things that I was most interested in healing, turning to psychedelics.
And has psychedelics helped you with regulating your emotions?
It has, absolutely. It's almost like, I think especially with MDMA, it's almost like it's removed, or it like where I used to get triggered, I don't get triggered anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just like removed some of the underlying kind of triggers, and the way that I've used it, I like with MDMA, I have, before I've ingested or taken the drug, I have decided beforehand exactly what I wanted to go into, what I wanted to look at, or what I wanted to heal.
Yeah. So it sounds like, as opposed to like taking some MDMA and going out dancing or something, not that there's anything wrong with that. You're talking about really prepping yourself and setting an intention, and then going in and exploring that in your journey.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you specifically go in and set an intention to work on being triggered?
I knew that I had some episodes, memories from my life that I found it very hard to look at or to go into. It's like when they came up for me in daily life, I sort of shut the door on these things. I knew I hadn't integrated them, even though I had tried in talk therapy. But the triggers sort of remained, and then the memories were sometimes too painful to look at for me. So what I did with in regards to the MDMA experiences, I actually picked out some memories or some episodes from my life that I knew I had a hard time looking at, and then I sort of journeyed into them.
Wow, you were doing this all by yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the first time I took MDMA, and the second time, that was actually with my boyfriend. But we used it in kind of the same way, because we had things in our relationship that we wanted to heal. But we also knew that they were probably individual problems connected to, our childhoods and, difficulties that we had as teenagers. And so it was sort of like relational trauma. But we did the same thing, we sort of planned out. But I feel like I almost have to say something, briefly about my upbringing, my childhood. I quit school when I was 9 years old, and I plain refused to go back. Everything was tried, so I was isolated for many years, almost completely isolated from my peers. And the situation at home was, of course, turbulent because of this. My parents were very upset that I couldn't. We tried everything. The thing is, I don't even remember, or I couldn't tell you like why that was that I just quit suddenly. I just withdrew from everything because of this long period of isolation. When I finally did sort of re-enter society at the age of 17, I started school again then. In order to prep for university, because I wanted to go to university. When I re-entered society, needless to say, I had a lot of problems with boundaries, for instance. I didn't know how to interact with people at all. I wanted to be liked very much, because I had been isolated for so long. I was so lonely, so I wanted to be liked. I think especially in relationships with men, this became a problem for me, because I simply didn't see my own worth in a way, and I gave away way too much, also physically. So I had a hard time setting boundaries when it came to my own sexuality. And this fear of rejection and this fear of saying no, it just grew and grew. It was actually like I struggled more and more with setting boundaries as I grew older. And I was still feeling very lonely, and I sort of started to in my mind, it was almost like the idea or the notion of love and also sex or sexuality is sort of merged into one thing. So I thought that, if I gave away my body, then I would be loved. And I continued in this vein for years and years, and I gave myself away, or gave my body away to numerous men who frankly did nothing wrong. But it was more like a betrayal in myself. I didn't have that safe, comforting relationship to myself. To be perfectly honest, it almost at times felt like there was nothing in there. There was just this intense need to be loved and accepted.
Inside of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I sort of felt when I looked inward. And then more externally, I was trying to use my body to fill this need, or this hole, this gap. And so, on that quite hopeless journey, there were a lot of situations that, I wish that never took place. I'll be very frank about it. I mean, I probably slept with 100 men who I didn't really desire, because I just wanted them to stay with me, and I thought that that was the way to get them to do that, was to sort of give them my body. Some of those situations, I let them do things to me that I really didn't want to happen, but I sort of shut off. I kind of disassociated, and they happened. Often in the morning, or the following week, I would feel a lot of anxiety. I would use a lot of energy to sort of not have to think about the things that had happened. Yeah, and also I would use alcohol to sort of, send those memories down into the basement somehow. And over time, the anxiety that I felt just grew and grew. And so I suppose around the age of 25, I decided that what I was doing wasn't working. My strategy was not working. And I had romanticized it all the way. I had to romanticize my life because it was so painful. Some of those relationships, or maybe more specifically some isolated incidents or episodes, yeah, I mean, I would call it sexual trauma, even though there was no force, and I would in no way consider it rape. But I still did something that I deep inside really didn't want to do. It was a compulsion. And because I sort of split off from myself during a lot of these incidents, it felt in a way like it didn't really happen to me. But it did happen. And what I heard about MDMA was that it might make it easier to look at those particularly painful things.
Can you say a little bit about what the actual experience was like taking the MDMA when you had set the intention to work on some of these more kind of painful episodes and memories?
Yes. Perhaps I can tell you about the first time that I took it, which was with my boyfriend. In those first times, the intention was more to heal, relational difficulties and trauma and things that we were working on together and things that weren't working in the relationship and so on. But something quite interesting happened sort of midway through the trip. Or I had just sort of gone past the up.
The peak?
The peak, kind of, and things were stabilizing, and I was feeling more at ease, in the drug or with the drug, because now I finally knew what it was and what it felt like. And the first thing I noticed was that my capacity for empathy just skyrocketed. And I thought that was very fascinating. But it was like when my boyfriend talked about his experiences or his emotions, I sort of listened in a new way, and I felt like I really could put myself in his shoes. And when I realized this, I sort of had this thought, like, because I had, in many ways, been very hard on myself. You know, I'd been judging myself a lot because of the things that I'd done to myself. That was the way that I saw it. And I sort of wondered, well, could I turn this empathy towards myself? Maybe for the first time. And it was a huge, it was big empathy, you know. I felt like it could stretch anywhere, like, you know, into all the corners of the room. And it was very expansive, and it was intense, but in this really like warm, beautiful way. And it felt like I had sort of tapped into something that was already there, and it was kind of just being, you know, seduced kind of to the surface or something. But I remember at that point, so I wondered, you know, could I turn this empathy towards myself? Could I maybe look at some of these things that I have such a hard time looking at? And so I did that, and I remember at that point, you know, I was lying in the couch with my boyfriend, you know, we were sort of holding each other, but at that point I moved away a bit from him, and I gave myself a bit of space. Something came up quite suddenly, and I sort of followed that lead. But it was actually in relation to how I perceive myself in the world, especially around men. And I realized for the first time that I was actually addicted to being seen and looked at. That this need was sort of so compromised, or like compressed, and so kind of all, what's the word I'm looking for? All
consuming?
Yeah, all consuming. That it was just like a solid wall in my life. I mean, it was just so, you know, no wonder I couldn't see it, because it was just such a big part of my being, you know, was this need to be seen, right? And I just sort of closed my eyes, and I just had these visions of me just constantly like walking down the street or sitting on the bus, or just, you know, with this, you know, immense need to be seen. I mean, this addiction to eyes, and also the way that, you know, the way that I dressed myself, the way that I walked even. I mean, it was all about this attention. Let me tell you, one of the things that convinced me that MDMA has an enormous healing capacity was that only a couple of days after this, without even thinking about it consciously, I started to dress a little differently. I went on the bus, and for the first time in a very long time, I brought a book. And I was just sitting there reading. And I realized that I wasn't seeking, you know, those eyes, that attention, in that moment. And when that hit me, I was very overwhelmed and very moved. And I did link it back to the experience. I thought, you know, this has been shown to me. Something has been shown to me. And now I'm almost subconsciously choosing to act differently. And that for me was, well, actually, it's probably one of the more beautiful moments in my life.
After Melissa described such an incredible experience using the MDMA and feeling lasting effects immediately following her journey, I got curious about any work she was doing to integrate the experience further in her life. Melissa tells me she had chosen an album by the artist Blue Tech and played it on repeat during her first and some subsequent journeys. And that enables her to revisit her experience whenever she listens to the album, even when she isn't using MDMA.
So what I did was I lay down in bed like a couple of days after we had this first experience, and I put on this album. And it immediately brought me back into this kind of relaxed state. And I remembered what it felt like to feel this great empathy and openness, this complete like lack of fear. And of course it wasn't as intense, but it opened up some windows kind of for me. So it's like that with music, I think, at least for some people. It really does put you back in a situation, or it brings back emotions, And so I continued to do this for actually a couple of months. And I just sort of kept, with the integration work, I just sort of kept trying to focus on what was sort of revealed to me during these trips. And it really did feel like something was shown to me, and that it was of high importance. Like, this is what you need to look at, in order to be free. I haven't done MDMA for many, many months, but it's like when I put on this album, something happens to me. I feel very safe, and I feel maybe like it's safer to feel the feelings that I'm feeling. It's almost like I'm being cradled. And that's what the drug or the compound, or that's what it feels like, of course, is this sort of kind of radical safety.
MDMA.
Yes,
yeah.
Radical safety, yeah.
If you remember earlier on in the interview, Melissa said she has really struggled with regulating her emotions. So I asked if listening to the album helps at all with her struggles around that. And this is what she had to say.
The album has helped me in sort of maintaining this connection to the healing experience that I had with MDMA. And it's a constant reminder that, it is possible to heal, but also to experience things without fear. So that's been the most important thing for me. So often at night, if I've had a hard day, I can put on this album, and maybe I can sort of enter into some of the things that I am actually afraid of. And then it feels a little safer. And also this complete lack of moral judgment. There is no morality in a way, there's just understanding.
I mean, it sounds like understanding and compassion replaces shame.
Yes, yeah. And because sometimes sometimes the shame, just a cultural evil, in a way. It gets so big that you just can't navigate your own emotional landscape. And if there are tools out there that can help you do that can help to sort of just pause the shame at least, and see maybe what's behind the shame, and see that, it's also possible to feel compassion for yourself and for others. Because of course the shame, it distorts your relationship to other people as well, and you sometimes even project it onto other people, and it's so.
I was also curious about how it was for Melissa to do an MDMA journey alone. I asked her what it was like, and here's what she had to say.
I was actually a bit nervous about doing it on my own. And I had this fear that maybe some of the warmth and connection that I had experienced the first couple of times that I had done it, that it had very much to do with my boyfriend. And maybe some of the warmth I felt was actually a physical warmth. And I wasn't sure what to expect, or I was nervous that it was going to become a more a cooler kind of experience. But I was pleasantly surprised to find that I didn't need anybody else there in order to tap into that compassion and warmth. And so the first time I did it on my own, I just lit some candles and I lay back, under a blanket. And I put on this album, and very quickly, actually, things started to pop up in my consciousness. And a lot of these images were connected to some of these memories that I have been trying so hard to suppress. But what happened was that I saw these incidents. I saw myself doing these things that I really didn't want to be doing, or doing these things that I didn't want to do, and it just felt like it was okay. It wasn't really that scary anymore. It was just sad. It was just sad, And I just felt a lot of compassion for myself. And I saw that I was trying very hard just to survive in the world, and that I had just chosen a strategy that just wasn't working and that was hurting me. But I didn't know that. It also felt like there were no bad intentions at all, you know, in these incidents that I had started to fear so much, you know. But there were no bad intentions. There was nothing bad there. That's what I saw. It was just a lot of sadness. And so I realized that the work that I have to do is grieving work. I have to grieve mainly actually sort of what wasn't there or what hasn't been there. And that's a very abstract thing, you know, to grieve something that does not exist. But psychedelics has actually helped materialize that sort of abstract notion for me. Because on MDMA I could almost see the outline of my grief. And I viewed it sort of a bit like a sphere or a ball. And it felt a bit like I'd taken like a needle and poked a little hole in it, and it, you know, very slowly the grief had begun to run out. And so it became clear to me that the work that I have to do in order to heal is grieving. But, you know, my first time doing MDMA on my own, it was very physical in a way. I mean, I just kind of threw my arms around myself, and I was like, it's, you know, I just cried, you know, cried and cried like a child, just saying and really meaning, you know, it's, you haven't done anything wrong, you know. It's okay.
Well, it sounds like you were grappling with a really intense sense of shame.
Yes.
And that in that experience, you were able to speak to yourself about, I mean, I think in a sense, loving yourself. And like you said, understanding instead of judgment, understanding instead of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And just when you talk about feeling so afraid to experience these memories or to go there,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when we defend against grief, we feel it as anxiety.
Yes.
And when the anxiety softens, all the sadness comes. And it's so scary to confront that grief.
Absolutely. Because it was so immense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it wanted. Yeah. I didn't know that it was grief.
Yeah.
But that's what the MDMA helped me
to see.
To see that it was actually grief, and it was actually sadness that I was defending myself against. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you're describing this really important thing that I think is hard to name, which is when you grieve a thing that was never there. And it can be really confusing for people to kind of, you know, to be able to say, like, I feel sad, immense grief about a thing that didn't ever happen. But it's so real, it's so human, because as human beings, we really need love and connection. We need to feel like we belong.
Yeah.
We need to feel like we're safe, and we need to love ourselves.
Yes.
And it sounds like you're speaking to all of those things on different levels.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is a lack of connection that I've felt. I mean, I think even the love was there, kind of, but it wasn't tapped into. Mm-hmm. And that's you know, the love is there. That's what I appreciate, I think, about psychedelics, is that it just sort of, it brings forth something that is you. So it feels like nothing comes from outside. It's just a sort of opening up of something that is there, or tapping into something that is there.
Melissa has also used LSD in a healing capacity to work on issues around her sexuality and her body. For some context, in this next part of her story, she took around 100 micrograms of LSD, which is what is generally considered one hit.
I had a really interesting inward journey into my body and some of the issues that I have around my body, and the way that I've sort of sexualized my body, or like my body has primarily been a sexual object. I took LSD this time with my boyfriend, and we were in the woods and it was summer and it was warm, and so, you know, we started to feel good in our bodies eventually, and so we got undressed and we were lying in the grass naked, and he sort of kept approaching me and wanting to touch me and, you know, kind of wanted to make love to me. And I was, maybe for the first time in my life, not very interested in that, because I was starting to feel kind of at home in my body, or I felt like it feels good to just be, you know, and relax in this body. And also I sort of had kind of a sensual experience, you know, with myself, but I mean, it wasn't sexual, but it was, sensual, like physical, and I was very surprised that I sort of kept pushing my boyfriend away, and while I was doing it, I didn't understand anything, because for so long, you know, I'd been addicted to that kind of attention, right? But also the feeling of merging, like with another human being, not being in myself, you know, that escape. And on this particular LSD experience, I just wanted to explore the inner landscape of my body as well, not just the physical, you know, the outside lines or anything. That as well, I mean, it was physical, but it was like I wanted to get into all the areas of my body that on a day-to-day basis I don't feel. I suppose what happened was that actually sort of a different merging occurred. I just sort of merged into the nature that was around me, but not just the nature, into something bigger as well. And what happened then was that I didn't view my own body as a separate thing. It was just another manifestation of a force, right? It was just like the tree that I was lying and looking at. And then I fell in love with this one tree. I sort of explored my own body as if it was a tree. But the way that this helped me, I think for months afterwards, I just had this afterglow of feeling like, you know, I was a part of everything that was around me. My body wasn't primarily like a tool or an object. It was more like, the manifestation of a force.
Melissa has obviously tried a number of paths toward healing and integration, and a lot of it has been very DIY. I asked her to speak to the kinds of lasting change that are happening in her life because of her use of psychedelics, things that are noticeably different than what her life and her symptoms were like before.
The most important thing for me is that I feel fuller.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's more going on inside me. I feel more curious about myself. I feel more curious about the universe and about perception. That curiosity is a great thing to have. I feel a much greater connection to nature. I feel like a part of nature. I don't feel apart from it. And that connection is making my need for connection my need to connect with other people is making that less intense, because I have this connection to something that is always there. Nature is always there, you know. And it feels a bit like a friend, or a bit like coming home, or coming into myself, or something. But I have this support there because I can appreciate it. And I think a lot of that has to do with these experiences, maybe particularly LSD, with the connection to nature. But that has had, I mean, that's had a big impact on my life. I view myself with more empathy, definitely, and perhaps everyone else as well. I mean, that is a quite profound change. You know, being able to at least try to enter into that space of love Sometimes it's not so easy, but I know that it's possible. That's the interesting thing, I think. I know the possibility is always there. And that gives you hope as well. Hope and drive to continue, like on a healing journey. And of course, that journey is ultimately about connection, you know, to oneself and others. And that is the gift, right? I feel like there's immense potential in these substances if used correctly, of course. It has definitely helped to relieve my anxiety as well somewhat. I used to feel the anxiety much more like in my body, in my chest, and I feel that there's less of it. But I want to continue using psychedelics because I feel like it has more to give me. But it's already given me a lot, more than I ever imagined.
During our interview, Melissa also shared a bit about what was happening to that emptiness she spoke about feeling inside of herself. Here's a description of how her inner world was changing after that first MDMA experience.
Well, I've always viewed it this way, or like my internal landscape. When I close my eyes, I sort of have a vision of it. And it's like, at some point, maybe only 3 or 4 years ago, it was like a completely empty house. Like a house with no furniture. And during my healing process, it's like very gradually, suddenly there's like a chair there, or like a lamp. Oh, there's something on the wall, you know. So it's being, you know, there's a room that's being filled up, you know, it's being decorated in a way, but also given substance. You know, there are places to sit. That's very important. There are places to rest, right? You know, that the capacity to being, you know, or being capable of resting within oneself is something that I haven't felt since I was a child, probably. I definitely felt that day on the bus, you know, when I was reading and I realized that I wasn't seeking. I felt like the MDMA, you know, yeah, I felt like a couple of big, you know, beds had been brought into that room, into the house. That was what it felt like. And it was just like I could kick my shoes off and just lie back. I mean, that's what it felt like. Yeah. Because there was something there that wasn't there before, right?
All right. Thank you so much to Melissa for sharing her story, and thank you for taking the time to listen. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend. If you would like to stay connected, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @LauraMayNorthrup. And finally, special thanks to Joey Seward at Left Field Studios for volunteering a lot of additional audio engineering to make this series possible. If you need an audio engineer, he's excellent. You can find his website in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Inside Eyes. Until next time.